Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. My name is Matthew Baird. We've run this now nearly every week for verging on 2 years, so it's great to see so many of you with us today. And anybody watching back, hello to you too. This whole thing was formed originally during the pandemic when we were all trying to come up with ideas of what everyone was doing to deal with a whole new world that we were dealing with at the time. And it's just kind of evolved into this amazing community of people and conversations and everything else that goes with it. So it's great to see everyone who's with us today and as I say, and indeed watching back on the YouTube channel. This whole thing is funded by my social housing recruitment company. I've been doing social housing recruitment now for 11 years. It's the only way this stays for free. So if anyone is looking for support, please reach out. I'm told I'm quite good at what I do, so I'll leave that one as that. I'm delighted actually today because I'm always on the lookout for people who want to bring forward new discussions, new ideas, new conversations. And it wasn't long ago actually that Ellie and I got introduced to each other. Really, really recent actually. And it was kind of along the lines of, hey Matt, I've seen what's going on with the roundtable, can you get involved? Well, yes, absolutely. I don't get many people from kind of the marketing side come on. Would you be interested in putting something together? And we were able to put this together pretty quickly, which was brilliant. But I'm going to pass over to Ellie to kind of introduce herself and I guess where the idea for today's roundtable came from, because the idea of branding and marketing is something that I think is vital in the sector. If anyone's seen my LinkedIn over the last few days, it's really kind of been kicking off as well in terms of the discussion and the ideas and the both sides of the table that is so important to this discussion. So without further ado, Ellie Mickleburgh, over to you. Fantastic to have you with us today. Thank you so much for helping me put this together.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's great to be here. Thank you to everybody for joining us this morning. I think we'll probably get people coming and joining as we go along. So that's great, that's fine. We'll just admit those people as they join. I will be interested to hear from people in the chat. So Matt, if you can keep an eye on that for me. And if anything comes up, then just give us a shout. And I also just want to give a little shout out to any of my ex-Sage Homes colleagues that are on the line. A couple of them said they were going to join, so hopefully they're with us, and nice to see you guys. So Matt and I were having a discussion about marketing and brands within social housing industry. My background is marketing, and I'll share some of the experience I've had with you, but definitely wanted to raise the topic, and I know it's been discussed at the roundtables before, but I think it's really, really pertinent at this point in time, particularly when we're thinking about reputation and sort of messages that are out in the industry at the moment, and trying to recruit really, really strong talent into the sector. So I'm going to be talking about that a little bit. And also hopefully giving you an insight into some of the work that I've done to develop brands, and particularly the work that I did with Sage Homes as we relaunched the brand there as well. So this is where I try and get the technology to work for me and see if I can move the slides along. My computer seems to be working a bit slower than everybody else, so please bear with me as I try and make the technology work. Why is that not? Ah, there we go.
Fantastic.
Hopefully you've seen the next slide there. Good. So why do I qualify? So I got a marketing degree from Lancaster, so I'm fully qualified and trained in marketing. I've been working in marketing for over 20 years now, although obviously, you know, I started when I was 10. And I've got lots of experience in marketing across service industries. So I do specialise in service industries. And as you'll see from the brands that I've worked with below, I've worked in the travel industry, I've worked in the insurance industry, and most recently in social housing and housing sector. I've managed and launched brands, so I know about branding. I know how to create brands that really resonate with people. And as I mentioned, I recently relaunched the Sage Homes brand. which I'll talk about a bit later on. So I wanted to start with a quote. Branding Mag is one of my go-to publications. There's a lot of really good content in Branding Mag, so I would recommend having a look if you get a chance. And one of the quotes that spoke to me recently was this one: let's get something straight. Reputation builds up, whether the business does something about it or not. And I think we've seen that in the social housing sector over the past few years, where negative PR has really adversely affected the sector. And there was very little positive to counter that. So I'm not suggesting that the negative PR is going to go away, but what I'm suggesting is that we need to try and balance it out, and not to do that in an arrogant way, but to try and draw out some of the really good, authentic, interesting stories that are really positive that are coming out of the sector, and the things that the industry does to help people. And one of the reasons that I joined the sector was coming from the insurance sector, where it was all about helping people in a crisis, and the really positive stories that we were able to share as part of that. And I saw that opportunity within the housing sector. And that was one of the things that attracted me. So what problems can brand help with? So these are just a handful. There are lots more. And I'd love to hear about things that you think brand could help with in the chat if you want to. And also, if you see these problems within your organisation, please put a yes in the chat so that we know that these things are resonating with you. So reputation and perception of organisations in social housing. As we said, reputation builds up. And if you can use branding, you can then start to influence and control some of that perception and reputation. And I'm not suggesting, we put together a load of lies about our organisations. You can take the honest truths from within your organisations and tell those stories. And brand is a really good platform for you to tell those stories and gather those really positive experiences that people are having, and publicise those within our industry and outside of our industry as well. Engaging stakeholders. So, social housing doesn't have an obvious customer. I know we start to talk about residents as customers, which is great. I'm fully on board with that, and I love the fact that we think of residents as customers, but they don't buy anything from us, so it's quite difficult sometimes. And the audience that we're talking to, the stakeholder audience that we're talking to, can be really, really broad and varied. And when I was at Sage Homes, we identified 11 different stakeholder groups that we had to manage. So if you've got brands, you're able to use that brand to connect with those stakeholders. And if you haven't got that, it's going to be really hard for your stakeholders to engage, and make it harder for all of those stakeholder groups to support you as an organisation. Customers, residents, as I just said, I like the word customer. I'm a customer-centric person. I've done customer strategies, so I really enjoy looking at the service that customers receive. And I think brand can help you to build the relationships with your residents. So you can talk to them with a personality, you can talk to them with a consistent tone of voice, and that will help to build that relationship and connect and communicate with them. And communication, again, is something we looked at Sage Homes, and rewrote a lot of the communications that we were sending out to our residents, using a much simpler tone of voice, a much more engaging tone of voice. We got rid of all the jargon. We tried to talk to them in a really true, honest tone of voice and an honest way. And if you don't do that, if you talk to them with an inconsistent tone and you don't have any personality, then the likelihood is you will lose goodwill that you might have built up with your residents. And that can potentially lead to more complaints and poor resident behaviour. So actually the value of having a brand is really there. It's evident, it's obvious. It's not just about having this nice logo and nice kind of colouring in and nice pictures on your website. It's about that connection, that relationship with your residents, and the fact that you mean something to them. And then recruitment and retention. And I know this has been quite a big topic on some of the previous roundtables, but attracting talent and keeping those skilled employees in your organisation, and also attracting skills and talent from outside of the industry and bringing those people into social housing. If you've got that brand, you'll be able to connect with people, and a weak brand is definitely going to make it harder to draw those people in. And also keeping the ones that you've got within the organisation motivated. And one of the things when we launched Rebrand was we had a town hall with all the employees. We explained what the brand was all about and how it connected to the organisation's culture. It was also an opportunity for people to really recognise if the brand to resonate with them and make them feel part of something. So do you see those problems in your organisations? If you do, please say yes in the chat. I can see we've got 7 comments. So I'm just going to pause to see if Matt wants to comment on any of those.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ellie. I think there's certainly a lot kind of around kind of perception of things that's come in. Sharon Whitehouse has agreed with those 4 points, which is great to see. Kate Wood, I think every housing association will have these issues. We've seen even the largest housing associations, which have a G1, V1 rating, have these issues. And I think that point you made around engagement and reputation and perception is, I put a point in the chat myself about anybody not affiliated with the sector who doesn't know what G1, V1 is. If I talk to my family who aren't involved in this, they go, well, isn't that just a place where there's lots of problems with damp and mold? But that is the wider perception. And you don't see businesses as individual businesses. In the same way, they're kind of, it's almost like going, well, retail, where it's all awful, rather than going, well, actually, they're not so bad and they are good. But that's where that falls. So Lecky from Big Picture Training, this is where customer service comes in. If your customer service is poor, the brand identity you create doesn't translate into the brand image. There are so many synergies with brand marketing and the customer experience. Tenants may not consider themselves customers. They do have a transactional relationships with their landlord and therefore expect a good customer experience. So some really interesting points in the chat already.
Great, thank you for that. Thank you for engaging, really appreciate it. So I can get the slides to move on again, hopefully. Sorry, this is running slow. There we go. So a quote from a chap in Forbes, actually. Your brand is a platform to enable you to tell your story. You'll hear me talking about stories a lot. We are storytellers. That's what humans do. Sitting around the fire, many years ago, telling stories. It's the stories that connect and resonate with people. People recognise, people feel familiar with the story structure. And if you can tell a story for your organisation, then people will connect with that. And they will be able to recognise their own experiences within that. So identifying what your story is, what your organisation's story is really, really important. And creating a story that you can be proud of. And that's not in an arrogant way, it's in a humble way, telling that story of where you've come from, challenges that you've had, being honest about those challenges. Sometimes saying sorry as part of that process, and then where you want to go in the future is all going to be part of telling that story, the beginning, the middle, and hopefully a nice happy ending. So that's something that we're going to have a look at. So how can brand help? Brand initially can help build trust. So if people are looking at you, looking at your organisation, you want to have a brand that people can see is a strong professional brand, and that demonstrates that through the actions that you're taking, that your brand is true. And I think building that trust enables you to have that connection with your residents, but also if things do go wrong, it gives a much greater opportunity for you to say sorry and for people to forgive you. If you think about other brands that you know, brands that you use in your everyday life, brands that you really love and that you want to connect with, if they do something wrong, you're probably going to let them off maybe once or twice, maybe not hundreds of times, but certainly if one of your favorite brands does something, as long as they're open and honest and they apologize for it, chances are you'll forgive them and you'll give them another chance. Consistency and familiarity is really, really important, particularly when you're implementing your brand and your brand strategy. That consistency can again help people to trust you. They know what your identity is. It gives people an understanding of you and your brand, and it helps to motivate your employees because they feel a sense of belonging. And that familiarity, it almost becomes like a family, and the brand becomes the family name. Setting expectations. So in turn, having that brand, having that consistent brand allows people to know what they can expect of you and your organization. And that will help them to understand what to expect from you, and therefore not to have expectations that are too high and therefore you let them down, or expectations that are too low. It really gives a sense of allowing you to counter any negativity and also be authentic and honest with your residents and also with your employees as well. And by having that brand, you can also show that you care. And I think care is a really emotive topic, both within the industry and within organizations at the moment. Building that relationship and creating a brand that can talk about caring and can share stories about where you have cared for your residents, where you have cared for your employees, where you have cared for any of your stakeholder groups. And it's that ability to ask for forgiveness and to say sorry and to mean it. And having that strong brand can really create that authentic connection with people. So Tom Goodwin wrote a book called Digital Darwinism, which is a really interesting book. It's quite a general book about marketing, which is focused on digital. So that again is quite interesting in the environment that we're working in. And he says that brands are patterns of familiarity, meaning fondness and reassurance that exist in the minds of people. So that's something that we're trying to create. We're trying to get people connected and give them that sense of fondness, that caring, that reassurance that they can trust us, and that familiarity through consistency. So that just backs up what I've just talked about. So how do we do this stuff? We called it How to Build a Brand in 5 Easy Steps. I'm not actually suggesting that they're easy. They're easy to see, they're easy to say, they're not necessarily easy to do. And as you would expect, I would suggest don't try this at home, don't do it alone, please be supported by an expert. If you have marketing experts in your organization, that's fantastic. If you don't, I'm available to help if necessary, and there are others like me. So first of all, the really key thing is to identify where your organization is now. So you need to look through your organization and do research on the good, the bad, and the ugly. So don't just look at what the positive stuff in your organization is. You really have to be honest about things that are good, things that are going well, things that really motivate your employees, and then the things that are just annoying and get in the way and aren't working, and that actually, if you said you were good at it, nobody would believe you. You need to identify those things. Once you've identified those, that will help you to understand what type of culture your organization has. All organizations have a different culture. there are similarities, but there will be things that are done differently in your organisation than any other organisation. And it's really important to be really clear about what those are, because that's the thing that's going to allow you to really tap into the value of your culture. The second step is to then identify what you want to be in the future. So what are the good things we want to take with us on the journey? And what are the bad things that we want to start to try and rectify? Now, nobody thinks you're going to rectify those overnight, but putting forward an intent to improve is always going to go down well with stakeholders, people who are looking at your organisation, because they can see that you're on a journey and that you're on an improvement journey to try and make the organisation better. And when I worked at Aviva, we focused very strongly on this. We always said we had a vision of where we wanted to get to, and we were going to paint that picture for our customers. We were going to talk about what we already did that they didn't know about. So, for example, I think we were the first people to launch the campaign where we promised courtesy cards, because nobody knew that we actually gave courtesy cards to people when they bought insurance. So that was there already. It was a good thing, but nobody knew about it. So we had to start talking about it. And that's the same thing here. If there's good stuff you're doing, you need to start talking about it. But then if you've got vision, if you've got things that you are intending to improve and you're investing in improvements, that's worth talking about as well. Don't wait till you get there. Tell people that's where you're going. The third step in the journey is to take all of that and create that brand strategy that's going to really define your organization. So you've got the who you are now, you've got the where you want to be, and then you've got to tell that story. And that's what the brand strategy is all about. But you need to make sure that that brand strategy touches every part of your organization. So it's not just about changing the logo, changing the website, and making the fonts match. It's about your customer experience, and does your customer experience, your resident experience, match the identity that you want to put forward and that you want to be known for? So if your resident experience is really fast and efficient, then that might be the value that you want to put through. If your resident experience is slow, nurturing and caring, that might be what you want to be known for. Two different things, both have value, both will resonate with people, but they're quite different. So you can be authentically who you are as an organisation in a really positive way, and that needs to translate through the whole of your organisation. That will help you with, for example, recruitment, because you'll then be able to tell people who you want to attract to your organisation what you're all about and what sort of culture they're joining. How often in an interview do you get asked a question from someone who you're interviewing, what's the culture within your organisation? And can you answer that really eloquently? Do you know that? Or do you know the bit that is within your team and maybe it doesn't match the rest of the organisation? So it's really important to build that brand strategy and engage all areas of the business. And again, when I was at Sage Homes, we had a task force with representatives from all of our different departments. And I did a lot of work with customer services on what that customer journey, what that resident journey looked like and where we needed to improve and how we did that within the values that we had created. And then the next step is to start to talk about your story. And that's the full honest story. So that's not, oh, we're nice and bright and shiny and clean now. That is, this is the journey we're on. These are the challenges we're having. These are the things we're trying to improve. We're really sorry for the things we can't do, but we will try our very best to do them. And this is how it fits within the values that we have within our organisation. So telling that story is really going to help to engage your residents, and you can tell that story through the website. You can engage with workshops, you can do road shows, you can do all sorts of things in order to get that story out there. And then the last step is that, you know, this isn't something that's a project that you do in a few weeks and you present it and it's done. It's something that you need to manage and you need to continually develop and improve. And it's a cultural change that you're trying to develop through the organization. And so it's not going to happen overnight. It is going to take some time. And you have to commit to it, and you have to get the board to commit to it and the exec to commit to it, and you have to engage them all. And hopefully through the steps that you've gone through, by identifying who you are now and getting them to tell you who they think you are and where they want to go, getting people within the organization to tell you what they think the culture is, where they think we are now and where they want to get to, enables that brand to then come from a really authentic place. And again, we did that within Sage Homes. We did workshops with employees, with the managers, with the staff on the front line. We did that with the exec, and we got everybody to talk about the culture within Sage, what it was like, the good things, the bad things, what they wanted to change. And that's how we developed the brand. And then we went out and told that story. So those are the 5 easy steps. As I said, they were never going to be that easy, but that's the process that you can go through. And if you go through that process, that will give you a really strong story to tell, and will give you a really good platform to be able to engage and talk to your residents and talk to your stakeholders and become a successful, really successful organisation. I make it sound easy, don't I? So, sorry again, the slides are being slow.
No problem at all.
There we go. So people talk about brand strategy, but what is it really? So a good definition that I came across again in Branding Magazine. A good definition of brand strategy is the considered intent for the positive role a company wants to play in the lives of the people that it serves and the communities around it. Now, this quote was written in a marketing context, but actually, I think you could take this and instinctively apply it to social housing. You know, this is absolutely what social housing is all about. It's about the positive role that social housing plays in the lives of the people it serves and the communities around it. So I really, really like that when I came across it, and hopefully that resonates with you as well. I'm going to just quickly pause and see if there's anything in the chat that Matt wants.
Well, the chat is certainly lots and lots has been happening in the chat, which is fantastic. I'll let you do your summary, as it's loaded up, and then we can really do a deep dive and hopefully bring some people in, because I think your point you made there was really interesting as well on the last one, which is that this is what social housing is all about. And I think it's that blend between this is what social housing should be all about and not necessarily what some businesses in the sector are all about. And I think that's the balance between the two. And your point around identifying what you are and what you want to be, again, from an employee perspective, certainly, and from a recruitment side, there are businesses actually who are in one place and are very happy with what they are, but don't want to be perceived as what they are. And I know Joe Leckie made that point earlier in the chat as well. And it's another area to really deep dive into. But please wrap up the summary. And I think your points have been really, really vital today. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So we've talked about how brand is really important to help you tell your story and manage that reputation. People are going to talk about you, whether you have a brand or not. And ideally, you want to be able to influence how you are presented. It's your entire identity of your business and gives you personality. It's something people will expect to see. So if you haven't got a brand, or you haven't got a brand that you manage, then you're missing an opportunity, and potentially you could be damaging your organization. Brand indicates your intentions and can help build that trust. Trust is a big issue across many industries at the moment, particularly in the economic environment that we're in. And building that trust is going to be so, so important for people as they're in sort of economic hardship. They want to be able to trust the organisations that they engage with and that they work with. And branding can help you build that relationship and connect with any of your stakeholders. So my final food for thought is, do you think your organisation has a brand or a brand story? I'd be interested to hear that. You know, I know there's been a lot of chat before this session about, you know, is marketing and brand even worthwhile in social housing? And what would it take for you to feel proud of your brand? So do you sit there in your organisation going, oh, I'm not going to tell anybody I work here because it's awful? Or do you sit there going, actually, I'm doing something really worthwhile and I really love working for the organisation that I work for? How do you feel, and what would it take for you to feel proud?
Two amazing questions. Thank you, Ellie. I think it's there's going to be an interesting blend, I think, for the next half an hour of where we go with this. And Joe, it's amazing to see you already raise a hand because I normally have to pick. I'm going to bring Joe in, and then there's some points in the chat I want to reverse back around to. But Joe, I know this is it absolutely resonates so much with you. And if anybody would like to get in touch with Ellie, that last slide there had your contact details, and I'll make sure it goes around at the end of today's session. But Joe, please come in. And Ellie, thank you so much for that presentation. It was really interesting. But Joe, over to you. You're still on mute. There it is.
Oh my goodness. So yeah. Ellie, you're my absolute soulmate, Ellie. I've already messaged you on LinkedIn, already done that. So please read that when the session's finished. Okay. Everything that you said resonated so much because it's what I talk about all the time. At Big Picture Training, we specialise in training into the social housing sector, particularly around the customer experience and customer service. So everything that we train out has a customer service, is through a customer service lens. And we talk all the time about brand identity and familiarising our delegates with their organisation's brand identity and how important that is, not only on in terms of marketing the organisation, but on impact on stakeholder, the various different stakeholders that you talked about. And it has different impacts on different stakeholders. And essentially, if your organisation can have the most amazing branding, but if the employees aren't living that branding, if they're not living those values, if the culture is not right, it won't become the brand image. And that's the problem that we've got actually in the sector at the moment, isn't it? Absolutely. We've got these organizations with amazing branding. They're talking these amazing stories. They are winning awards, but that doesn't translate into the brand image. That's not actually what's happening on the ground. And that's where the customer experience and customer service is so important. So actually the synergies between what you do and what I do, huge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, and as I said, we worked very, very closely with the customer service team and looking at customer journey mapping and so on as we were developing the brand. And you're right, Joe, that sort of authenticity. You know, people will smell immediately if you're not being truthful, and that's why I talk about, you know, being able to say sorry, being able to admit mistakes. And trying to rectify those, because if you just paint this picture of everything being beautiful, people just won't believe you, and then you'll lose their trust.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what happens. You lose people's trust, and then you end up with people who become vexatious and are trying to undermine you. And that's
then some businesses choose to just ignore those people and put them on blocks and other things, and then the problem exacerbates. In terms of the chat, so I'm just trying to catch up to where we were, because some of these have flown around due to replies and things, which has been brilliant. One of the points said, I feel the most powerful aspect of the brand is internal. It's about what you do, not what you say. And I think that's a really powerful point there from Claire Patterson. And you know, I was jotting down that
one of my previous brands, I had a brilliant chief marketing officer, a lady called Amanda McKenzie. And she used to say, a brand is what a brand does. And I think that is absolutely true. And that organizations who take that on board will completely change their customer experience strategy because of what they want their brand to be. And that's where the authenticity comes through. So you're absolutely right.
And I think there's an interesting point there, that you have a brand regardless if you want one or not. Like you have a brand. And if you choose to hide from everything and don't have a website, whatever else, where your brand then is how social housing is perceived. And I'm going to come on to that in a minute, because actually Floris made a really interesting point about collaborative, whether your brand is your brand or whether it's a social housing brand. It's an interesting one, but I'll come on to that in a moment, because Alison Leach had made a point about how do we square spend on this with the increasing focus on bread and butter housing management, which is a reputational issue in itself. Now, Claire mentioned, I think we need to spend on the bread and butter first and foremost, and that builds your brand organically. Same as reputation, that happens regardless of whether you plan to build it or not. And it reminded me a little bit on, and this is very, very left field, but do stick with me. Brewdog last year or a couple of years ago did a big marketing stunt where they said, find this can, this gold can, and it's worth 50 grand or whatever it was. And it was gold plated can, and it wasn't worth quite as much. And they were like, well, obviously this was a marketing thing, and it really damaged the brand. And because people lost trust, but the product stayed good and the product kept improving. And then they won people, and this year they've relaunched it, almost mocking themselves. And some people have gone, well, hang on a minute, you actually misled some people here. We don't like the fact you're mocking it. And others have gone, oh, well, that's their brand. But they're not losing customers because of it, because their product is still good. And I think that's where Claire's point was really interesting, which is focusing on the bread and butter. You can say you're as great as you want to be. You can do all this stuff saying, look how great our customer engagement is. If your housing stock and your quality is still poor, that doesn't matter, because it takes one news story. I didn't know and still don't know anything about the state of Rochdale Borough Community Housing's stock, but I know one place was awful and a young kid died because of it. And that is, I think, a massive part of your brand as well, Ellie.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think it's interesting, the Brewdog story, because that was part of their personality. It was authentic, and so people forgave them for it because they love the brand. And if you're drinking Brewdog, you're engaged with the brand, and it's something that you love. And so if somebody does something small, I'm not saying it, if you made a big mistake, there's every chance that people will completely trash you. But if it's a small mistake and you own up to it and you continue to talk about it in the right tone of voice, in an authentic way that's true to your brand, then people will still trust you, and you're not trying to be something you're not. I'm still happy to engage with you. Obviously, there are situations where if it's a serious mistake, then that may not be the case. But that's a really good example. Again,
that's where ownership comes in, and I think part of the further damage with what happened with Rochdale was that those maybe at the very top refused to step down until they were forced to do so, and people went, well, are you actually taking ownership for this? And that rolled on. Alison, great to have you yourself. Please do come in. You've already unmuted.
Hi, yeah. I agree with what you said. It's not quite what I meant. It was a little bit like what Ellie said a bit back about, you've got all these housing associations who are getting named and shamed, and they've all got fancy sort of campaigns, and it just doesn't kind of mean anything. So I suppose I'm thinking, if you spent that marketing budget on another 10 housing officers, would you have happier tenants? And how bothered are tenants about that, as long as they know where to complain and where to go? Having said that, I know we've got a recruitment problem, and I think some of the marketing stuff might work on potential staff. So you might not have the housing officers if you don't have a decent brand. That's the argument I can see for it. But I mean, I've long had a big problem with sector awards things before it, But I just think, we're now at a point where we really need to seriously balance. I'm not saying the principles of what you're saying, it's the money that some people spend on it, and rebranding and chucking out everything and redoing it, and it just makes me cringe a bit, really.
So Alison, thank you. That's a really interesting point, and I know that people sit there thinking that, so I'm really glad that you brought it up. And I've had people say to me, when I've been a marketing director, not just in social housing but in insurance organizations, why are we spending all this money on marketing when we could pay, give people pay for claims? For me, it's not about either or, it's about both. If you can do marketing efficiently and you do it well, you shouldn't need to spend a huge amount of money. You're still going to need to spend a bit of money, but you should be able to do it efficiently. And that's about having a good, strong, experienced marketing team who know how to run things effectively. So, you know, that's about good quality marketing people and marketing talent. And I would always suggest that if you can get good quality marketing talent into organizations, your marketing should be able to be more efficient, and you shouldn't, you know, marketing budgets should be able to be decreased, because you should be able to find ways, you know, the money that you spend can be spent more efficiently. Always, you can always improve. With regards to the recruitment, I think you're absolutely right. If you don't have a strong brand, that's not going to help recruit people into the organization. So managing that brand, and I think it's interesting you talk about, you know, throwing it all out and rebranding. When we rebranded Sage, we didn't throw it all out. And if you look at the brand, you'll see still got the owl, and there was a big discussion about the owl. You know, what does the owl mean? What does it mean for the organization? Do people recognize it? Should we change it to something completely different? How does it create meaning for our brands? So, you know, it's not just an owl. It has a lot of meaning behind it. We looked at the connection and, you know, the equity, the value that was within the brand and within the owl, and the fact that people recognize and are familiar with that owl as part of Sage. And in my presentation, I talked about that familiarity, creating that connection and meaning that people, you know, resonate with that. So it's not about chucking it all out. It's about keeping the good stuff and making it even better. And that's what rebranding should be doing. So you should see the value if it's being done well. If it's being done badly, then you need to not do it.
And I think often that's where the problem is when people see a new campaign that's come out, it's done absolutely nothing. It's actually half full of lies, and people go, right, well, that's not done us anything at all. Then, I mean, there's a few people in this room today who I met through my own branding. Ellie, I mean, you're one of them. And Joe and Claire, you know, through, you know, this is part of my brand. Other things that I've done are part of my brand. When you find out who I am and you look at my page, like, right, well, he knows recruitment. You're not speaking to someone who doesn't understand the sector. And these things matter, but that's because I've done this for 11 years. Yeah. Like, if you just get someone in just to go, I find it frustrating when a business goes, oh, we've got a new apprentice in, they're going to do our marketing for us. I'm like, right, well, you're just setting them up to fail, because it's not a simple thing. But when done right, it's brilliant. When done poorly, it's damaging. And I think that's the blend between the two. Claire, I'm going to bring you in, and then I'll jump to Joe, and I will get back to the chat points in a minute. So thank you, everybody who's had an input there.
Thanks, Matt. I just wanted to pick up actually from what Alison and Ellie have said about throwing it all out. I'm curious, Ellie, did you actually throw out actual things? You know, I'm thinking name badges and all that kind of thing. Did you replace all of those? The letterheads, if you've got such a thing as letterheads anymore? Because I remember that being something that residents, customers would see and were kind of like, that is such a waste of money. And like Alison said, why aren't we spending that on housing officers?
Yeah, no, thank you, Claire. That's a very, very good point. And allows me to talk a little bit about ESG as well, which is really, really important, and certainly something that from a Sage point of view, we wanted to embrace ESG. And obviously, if we went around, you know, in a week, chucking out all the old letterheads and replacing it with brand new letterheads, from an ESG point of view, that's not where we wanted to be. So what we did was we communicated with our residents and said to them, we are changing our brand. Over the next year, you will see changes being implemented, and this is why. So we were very open about what we were doing and why we were doing it, and actually engaged with our residents. And we have a residents panel, and we shared the branding with the residents panel and actually got their input. And talked to them about what we wanted to do, and got their feedback as to, you know, how that would impact them as a resident, and did they even care? And you know, what it meant for them. So we actually had 2 slots with them 2 months apart. So at the very beginning of the process, where we were saying, you know, this is what we think we're all about, this is the values we're thinking about, what do you think? Does that make sense? And then when we'd developed the brand strategy and developed the new look and feel and language and tone of voice and the things that we wanted to change about our customer experience. So we had a customer improvement plan that came out of the customer experience changes we wanted to make. We connected those into the values and we shared that with our residents panel as well and said, you know, does that look authentic? Does that look like the brand that we want to try and put across? And we took feedback on that.
That's what it does. It has to be authentic, doesn't it? And honest.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think to summarize, we did it over a longer period of time in order to do it effectively and not waste any money.
Yeah.
And we engaged to make sure that our residents were happy about us doing that.
I think we also need to fully remember that this is tenants' money.
Yeah, absolutely.
So actually, that's another part there. If you talk about how your brand and where the decision was made in consultation, that reinforces that brand, if that's what you're saying your identity is all about. So it seems like Sage really went out of their way to go, right, well, this is what we want to be. And as I touched on earlier, you know, it's whether every housing provider wants to be that, I think is part of the challenge. There was a couple of points made in the chat, so which kind of really reinforced this, which is one that Kate Wood said that building a brand in conjunction with the changes in government policy, like local and national, is really difficult at the moment. And I guess that's backed up by Floris's point, which is should housing associations work on their own brand or work on a joint sector branding exercise to improve the overall image? And I mean, I personally said the joint would be amazing, but there's a lot of lack of trust between organisations themselves. And Tosin, who's with us today, said that each association has its own DNA, so it may be difficult to have a joint branding, but a joint approach to behaviour and values as a social housing sector could really work. Unfortunately, playing devil's advocate then said the issue then leads us to why is a business in this space in the first place? There are too many that spent too long leaning towards a purely commercial standing, and it's getting more difficult to ascertain who's doing things the right way. And I think there is a lack of trust between providers in the sector at the moment. It's one of the things this roundtable is trying to do is kind of go, look, come to the table, have a listen. You are not on your own if you want to try and do things this way. But as we talked about before actually we started today, there are businesses out there, there are people applying for roles that companies closed down because of bad practice. You're going, well, was that just because the exec team was or an executive even was taking money out of the business, or was it because actually there was a bad culture? So who's to blame, and can we hire from businesses which went under? And all of this really has an impact both on brand and on the sector as a whole. Yeah.
And I think so as Sage were looking at partners that they were going to be working with, you know, as an organisation, you can't tell another organisation how to do what they do, but you can influence it. And what we were doing was saying, you know, these are our values. This is what we want to be as an organisation. Share yours, and we'll map them and make sure that they map. So understanding where there are things that we both believe in that we're working on together and really focusing on those. So
did that come from kind of executive team down in terms of this is what we want the business to be? Because that's
absolutely
one of the most important parts. I know from working with both Joe and Claire and others in this room who I've worked with, that's been the struggle sometimes, is going, well, we need to be better with customers, so which your culture's telling me you're not interested in customers. So how do you want us to do that?
Absolutely. And to the point where we were taking the values and the culture and the brand and putting those into people's performance metrics. Brilliant. So people were being measured and judged on the way in which they were behaving and working as part of brand values.
Fantastic. I think so many more times people will be successful in management if you manage people on the values and their ethics rather than on necessarily just performance, because everyone has bad months, good months, lucky months, unlucky months. So completely agree there, and you never know what patch you're going to get. You could get an incredibly problematic patch and suddenly it sounds like you're an awful at your job, and it's not. It's the nature of the role. A few points in the chat. So Joe Lucky had said that brand image versus brand ID is a subject we talk about in our customer service training. It's important that employees are aware that they're responsible for turning the brand ID into the brand image, which is really powerful. And she said, I think a lot of people know the culture of their organisation, but wouldn't necessarily want to be honest about it. And I think that, again, touches on that point we've made before. Then if you're in that kind of business and you can see businesses that have got a good brand that really are authentically showing that that's the place you want to work, you're more likely to apply for those roles. And I think that's where that recruitment piece comes in, because it's still an incredibly competitive market out there with not enough candidates for the roles that we need. Sani Salisu, it's great to have you back with us, Sani. I haven't seen you for ages since you got your promotions and have been amazing. But it's so good to have you back with us. He said the whole sector needs to be clued up on this and start to showcase what positive impact we make in the lives of the people we serve. And that's the other side of it, is no matter how bad if you are in a business which maybe isn't quite in line with, in tune with your own values, there are still people who are doing brilliant work day in, day out, that if that work isn't recognised and talked about as part of that brand, they will leave you, and their income's an even bigger problem. And then there was a piece which I mentioned about, that honesty piece you mentioned. There was a point made by Claire, if I can find it, here we are. So something that always stuck with me from her quality assurance training, the ISO 9001, was the customers with a complaint that you handle well will actually be more satisfied than customers who didn't have a complaint. So maybe we should cause complaints on purpose and fix them to improve customer satisfaction. So that was absolutely a joke, I know. But I like that small improvements to an already good service have less impact than a well-handled complaint. And as I put on the flip side, if you have a bad service, you tell everybody. And imagine that piece, that complaint handling, Ellie, this is something Joe and I have talked about a lot, as well as other people on the round table. How did complaint handling as a service change as part of this kind of brand reshaping?
Yeah, so we worked very, very closely with complaints. We looked at a lot of the complaints that came through and fed that into the audit of the Where We Are Now. Tone of voice was a big feature as part of complaints. I worked with the head of complaints on what sort of language we were using in our complaint responses. And then also looking at a whole series of customer improvements as a result of the complaints, and going back to people who had made the complaints and sharing that with them. So telling them, yes, you made a complaint, we messed up, we're really sorry, this is what we're doing about it. Even if it was kind of, this is what we're doing about it in the future and it's going to take us a while, owning up to that, but letting them know we've not just ignored the complaint. And the other thing is reviews, so Trustpilot reviews, things like that, sat with marketing. So we looked after that as a representation of brand. Now we would go to the complaints team to get some help on how to answer some of those reviews, but it was about managing the perception of our brand and our personality. And we took that on, and the tone of voice was influenced by brand and by marketing. And we worked on that with the complaints team together. So that's kind of how we address that in terms of complaints.
Brilliant. And I think, by the nods in the room, I think that's what needs to be done. I think it's about being collaborative and being open and honest. And it's funny because it reminded me, I was down at this, again, me doing a tangent, but Birmingham's becoming very, very well known for its street food. There was a new street food vendor open up. They opened up their own place. I went down, had a look. They said, it'll be about 20 minutes. No worries at all. After about half an hour, I was like, look, just finding out what's going on. They weren't too busy, but they had some new stuff. I didn't know this at the time. And said, it hasn't been half an hour, has it? And told me I was wrong. Now, the food was good. I'd had it before at more of a festival thing, really liked it. I told people about it. And now I'm going, I won't go back. And it's those little things that make you go, because that's who you are at your core when you're in your own space, and those things really matter. And actually, Kate would have put in the chat that everything we're talking about today ties in with the tenant satisfaction measures that many smaller housing associations are struggling with. And I think these new TSMs and everything over this next year of how this is all going to play out, this marketing and brand piece is going to be vital in how engaged tenants want to be with you and your company, because as you say, I know, and we've had people on this roundtable before, we've had tenants who've come on and gone, I'm not interested. If people want tenant engagement, I don't want to get engaged. I don't want to get engaged. And when you start to kind of ask questions and find out why, it's because there's no trust. They don't believe them. They don't believe what they stand for, but that's where the home they live in, that's who the landlord is. So they've got no choice. And like, right, so actually what they need to do is show you that they are a decent landlord and show their authenticity and take ownership for problems if you're ever going to engage with them. But right now you're just going, I'm done, but this is my home. And that's where housing is so different to everywhere else, because it is your home.
Yeah, and I think just going back to your story of the street food, if they'd set your expectations in the first place and said, actually, it's going to be half an hour because we've got some new staff, but it'll be really worth the wait and you'll love the food, you probably would have forgiven them and said, okay, I'll wait for half an hour, that's fine, I'll go off and do something, I'll come back, or something like that. And that sort of goes back to my presentation. Setting those expectations is really important in the first place, and communicating with your residents about what's happening. And there was often situations where we were trying to manage a complaint, where we'd go to the resident and say, look, this is what's happening. We'll come back to you, every week to tell you what's going on. Even if nothing's happening, even if there's a delay, we'll come and tell you. Even if it's bad news, we'll still come and tell you. And it's that sort of setting that expectation, and that's what builds the trust. If you deliver what you say you're going to deliver, then people will trust you. And if you don't deliver what you say you're going to deliver, you lose the trust. And that plays into, what do you want your authentic brand to be?
And that will also massively empower your customer service teams to know that they can say that without kind of going, oh goodness me, we're talking bad about the company, they're going to sack me. Joe, I've only got a minute left. Great to have you. Do dive in, because I know this is probably resonating with you massively. You're on mute again.
I'm used to being the facilitator, that's why. I just wanted to quickly ask you, Ellie, you talked about, we said that we would communicate and get back to people and tell them even if there was nothing to tell them, and tell them even if things had gone wrong. How did you make sure that all of the staff lived those behaviours?
Yeah, so as I said, worked very, very closely with Head of Customer Services, very, very lovely lady called Jen, who I worked very closely with. We were in the same team, so that helped. We were able to connect, and we worked on the customer journey mapping project together. So very, very close project working to make sure that customer service were getting the training that they needed in order to do that, to make sure that from a resource point of view they could cope with that, because we didn't want to make promises about going back to people and communicating with people if we didn't have the resource to be able to do it. So again, it's being honest about what you can manage and what you can do yourselves. They were a very busy team, and we tried to support them as much as we possibly could with more sort of automated communication. So rather than them having to go back manually to these people every week, if there was not much to say, we would do it through an automated communication, so that they didn't have to do it themselves. So there were ways and means, and it wasn't always easy, but we tried to stick to our values.
And that's the key thing. And there was a final point in the chat that said that, from Claire, the two things I bang on about most are purpose and trust. If you focus on achieving your purpose as a social landlord, you will earn trust organically. And if people can trust you, it's easier to achieve your purpose. Ellie, thank you so much for today.
You're welcome.
Again, the hour's just flown by. It was really insightful. I hope everyone's got lots they can take away from it. I'll share your details. Obviously, they'll go up onto the recording as well. But for now, thank you everybody who could join us today. I hope you found it as interesting and fascinating as I did. And I love the fact that we're having more conversations around marketing and branding, because it's so important. Next week, I am going to be running these through May, despite the fact we've got 3 bank holidays. So if you can make it, then brilliant. Dave Loudon's coming on to talk about how technology can make a real difference to the customer experience. So it really ties into what we're talking about today, and looking at things with an AI side of things as well. So until then, thank you. But Ellie, brilliant to have you with us today. Thank you for everyone who could join it, and I will speak to you all soon. Take care.